In this lesson, you will use G-types to assist with propagating data type changes throughout an application. First, let's discuss the problem that G-types will help you solve. Suppose you are working with a cluster that contains weather data, and you decide that you want to add another item to that cluster. What will this mean for your diagram and the rest of your application? Here we see the diagram for an application where you use the weather data cluster. Where on this diagram will you have to make this edit? Click each location on the diagram that would require an update. What if that cluster was being used in 25 different places in your application? You would have to make this edit to each instance of that cluster. Here we see the panel for an application that uses a weather data cluster. Let's observe the effects of changing the cluster data type. In this case, we're going to add a numeric indicator to the weather data cluster. And we'll name that numeric data current wind speed. Now let's look at our diagram. Here we can see that we have several broken wires that result from the changes that we made to the weather data cluster type. To address the problem of type change propagation, use a G-type. A G-type is a master copy of the data type and is saved as a document in the navigation pane. On this diagram, every instance of the weather data cluster has been replaced with an instance of weatherdata.gtype. Let's make the same cluster modification that we looked at earlier. To do this, I will open the G-type, and as before, I will add a numeric indicator and name it current wind speed. Now when I save the G-type, and go back to main.gvi, we can see that current wind speed has been added to the cluster and no broken wires occurred. Now that you understand the benefits of using G-types, let's explore how to create and use G-types on our panels and diagrams. Now let's explore how you can create a G-type from an existing control or indicator. You can select that controller indicator, in this case the weather data cluster, and then in the configuration pane, select Change to G-type. And you can see in the navigation pane it creates a G-type for you. Let's return to our diagram. You can see that the weather data indicator now has a black bar on the right side. That indicates that it is a G-type. To gain the benefit of change propagation for this type, you would have to replace the cluster constant and update each of the sub-VIs to use the weather data G-type. Anytime you create a cluster or enum, you should immediately convert it into a G-type. Cluster and enum data types are typically used in multiple places in an application. Modifications to clusters and enums, for example adding, modifying, or removing items, typically need to propagate to all of their instances. You have completed this lesson. Here's a summary of what you learned.